The wrong door, the right moment. It was a late summer afternoon in Sonoma County, a beautiful place where the vineyards stretched far across the hills like golden fabric. The sun was shining, making everything look warm and golden, like a moment frozen in time. A wedding was happening at Bella Terra Vineyard, a special family farm just far enough from the city to feel magical but close enough to still feel real. The guests were wearing soft pastel colors, laughing and clinking glasses, enjoying the celebration. Meanwhile, 40 minutes away, Keanu Reeves had just finished riding his motorcycle with some friends. They had taken a fun ride through the countryside in California. Keanu didn't have a fancy plan for the day. He just wanted to eat at a quiet cafe he had heard about. He was dressed in jeans, a leather jacket, and a black t-shirt. His hair was messy from the wind, and he was carrying his helmet. But when he arrived at the cafe, he noticed there were lots of cars parked outside. People were dressed in nice clothes, like they were at a wedding. Keanu wasn't sure what to do. There wasn't any sign that said, "Wedding," and no valet. Just then, a friendly woman waved at him. She was wearing a headset and holding a clipboard. "You must be here for the wedding," she said with a big smile. Keanu didn't really want to correct her. He could have said, "No, I'm just here for lunch," but something about her kindness made him decide to go along with it. "I guess I am," he said, smiling, and walked into the wedding reception. At that moment, Eliza and Nathaniel, a young couple who had already postponed their wedding 3 times because of the pandemic, were having their first dance. Their family was so happy, and the DJ was playing a fun salsa song. Guests were starting to relax when someone whispered, "Is that Keanu Reeves?" At first, no one believed it. But then, as Keanu walked through the reception, everyone turned and stared in shock. The famous actor, who had played characters like Neo in The Matrix and John Wick, was now standing near the food table, asking if the sparkling water was made locally. Eliza, the bride, was the first to walk up to him. She was barefoot, her wedding dress lifted a little at the edges, and she had a glass of champagne in her hand. She nervously asked, "Are you Keanu Reeves?" He smiled his usual gentle smile and said, "Yeah, I think I might have walked into the wrong event." There was a pause. It felt like everyone stopped for a second to take in what was happening. Then Eliza said something unexpected. "No, I think maybe you walked into the perfect one." The guests around them laughed. Her new husband, Nathaniel, joined them, looking surprised but happy. Soon, Keanu was being handed food, drinks, and even asked for a photo, not for social media, but for their personal memory. He accepted everything with kindness. Keanu didn't act like a big movie star. He just acted like a regular guest. He sat with the bride's great-aunt and talked about her late husband. He complimented the jazz musicians playing at the wedding. When someone gave a speech, he toasted with water. When a little flower girl tripped and started crying, Keanu knelt down and made a silly face to cheer her up. He was part of the wedding, just like everyone else. Of course, not everything was perfect. One person asked Keanu if he would star in their cousin's movie, and another tried to get him to act out a fight scene. But Keanu just laughed and said no. What was amazing was how he made everything feel so normal. He didn't make a big deal of himself. He didn't have cameras or a big crew. He just wanted to connect with people. When the night started to end, Keanu helped stack the chairs. Nobody asked him to do it, but he did it anyway. Before he left, he asked Eliza and Nathaniel if they wanted to take a photo with him. It wasn't for him, it was for them. They took the picture by the vineyard gate. No filters, just 3 people smiling, caught in a special moment they never planned. Keanu left quietly, the same way he came in. No big goodbye, just a wave, a smile, and a memory left behind like a single rose petal on the ground. The next morning, the sun rose over the hills, shining softly on the vineyards. At Bella Terra Vineyard, the staff was already cleaning up after the wedding. They were stacking chairs and cleaning up champagne bottles. But as they worked, they couldn't forget what had happened the night before. Someone had written a note in the guest book. It said, "You welcomed a stranger and reminded the world what grace looks like." And it was signed, K.R., Keanu Reeves. Meanwhile, Angela Hart, a graphic designer who had come all the way from Chicago for the wedding, was scrolling through her phone on the way to the airport. She smiled at the photos from the wedding. Some were blurry, but one caught her attention. It was the photo with Eliza, Nathaniel, and Keanu. Keanu was just standing there, smiling, holding a glass of sparkling water like he belonged at the wedding. Angela thought for a second and then posted the photo with a simple caption, "Only at Sam and Louie's wedding could something like this happen." Keanu was kind, humble, and helped stack chairs. Hollywood is lucky to have him. When her plane landed, Angela's post started getting shared by people. It wasn't because of the celebrity, but because of the kindness everyone saw. People wrote comments like, "This is the world I want to live in," and "Can we protect this energy at all costs?" Slowly, stories started spreading from other people who had met Keanu. A barista in Brooklyn remembered him tipping 200% and complimenting the music. A single mother in Pasadena remembered Keanu helping her push her car up a hill. A stagehand in Vancouver shared that Keanu had once brought coffee for everyone on set. These weren't big stories, but they were moments of kindness that people wanted to share. Eliza and Nathaniel didn't know about all this until their photographer called. She said, "You're not going to believe this, but people are calling your wedding the most wholesome celebrity story of the year." Nathaniel laughed. "It wasn't even our idea. The man just walked in." But as the story spread, it became more than just about Keanu. It was about kindness, humility, and celebration coming together in a way no one could have planned. Back in Los Angeles, Keanu's assistant showed him the photo from the wedding. Keanu looked at it and nodded. "They're good people," he said. "Do you want to comment?" the assistant asked. "No," Keanu replied. "Let the moment be theirs. I was just passing through." Later that day, Keanu called a florist in Sonoma County and ordered 24 wildflower bouquets to be sent to Belo Terra Vineyard. He didn't mention his name. He just asked for a note to be included. It said, "Thank you for reminding the world that strangers can become memories. Love is not private, it echoes." The flowers arrived the next morning. Eliza and Nathaniel were surprised, and the staff at the vineyard couldn't believe it. The note was simple and kind, with no mention of Keanu's name or any special attention. It was just a quiet thank you. The story kept growing. A wedding magazine wrote about it. They didn't focus on Keanu being a celebrity, but on the kindness that had followed. A children's hospital started collecting stories of kindness. Keanu never said anything to the press. He didn't need to. He knew the magic of being part of something without needing to take control of it. Eliza and Nathaniel still had the photo of Keanu, not because he was famous, but because it reminded them of the love and grace they experienced at their wedding. Their love story became something more than they could have ever imagined. It became a symbol of kindness in a busy, fast world. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most amazing part of all. Keanu Reeves walked into the wrong wedding, but he stayed. The letter came in the mail. It had been 3 weeks since the wedding. Life was getting back to normal, just like it always does with everyday routines and work. The flowers on the mantel were dry. The vows they made to each other were still remembered, but they didn't feel as strong as they did on the wedding day. Eliza and Nathaniel had come back from a short honeymoon, just 5 days in Big Sur, where they walked barefoot under the tall redwood trees and read books by a fire. They didn't talk much about the Keanu thing while they were away, not because they were avoiding it, but because they didn't want to look too closely at it. Some moments are too special to talk about too much. Back home in Santa Rosa, a white mailbox sat under the crepe myrtle tree in front of their small house. One afternoon, Eliza reached into the mailbox with the sun in her eyes and her grocery bag on her hip. She pulled out the usual stuff: credit card offers, a bridal magazine she didn't remember signing up for, and one special envelope. It was heavy, cream-colored, and written in beautiful cursive with a fountain pen. There was no return address. Just her name, Eliza Collins. Not Mrs. or Bride, just her name. It felt old, like a letter from another time. Inside was a letter written by hand on 2 pages. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and lemon. The handwriting was neat but not fancy. As Eliza read it, her grocery bag fell slowly to the floor. The letter said, "Dear Eliza, you don't know me. I wasn't at your wedding, and I wasn't even in the same state. But I saw a photo, just one, that changed something in me. I'm writing from a small town in Minnesota. I'm a hospice nurse. For the last 17 years, I've worked night shifts in a care center for elderly people. My days are long and quiet, filled with both grace and grief. A few days ago, a patient of mine, an older woman named Margaret, asked if I would sit with her while she looked at old family photos. She had been very sick and barely talking. But that morning, she asked me to bring my phone so she could see a bit of the world again. I scrolled through my feed for a while, then we saw it. The picture of you, your husband, and Keanu Reeves. She asked who you were. I told her I didn't know, just a couple of people, but they looked happy. She smiled for the first time in days. Then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "That's what love looks like when kindness is nearby." We sat in silence for a while. She kept staring at the photo. Then she said, "I wish I had known people like that." Margaret passed away the next night. I want you to know that moment, your wedding, your kindness, gave her peace. Thank you for letting a stranger wander in, and for letting the rest of us wander into your joy. Gratefully, Audrey West. Eliza read the letter again, then again. She sat down on the floor of her living room, her legs crossed under her. The sun was setting, making the wooden floor glow. She didn't cry, not right away. The feeling wasn't loud. It felt heavy, like someone had placed a small church inside her chest and whispered, "You were part of something much bigger than you." When Nathaniel came home, she didn't say anything. She just handed him the letter. After he read it, they sat in silence for a long time, holding hands, not saying anything because they didn't want to make the moment less special. Later that night, Eliza searched for Audrey West online. There were many women with that name, but she didn't know where to start. Maybe she didn't need to. Maybe the letter wasn't meant to start a conversation. Maybe it was meant to be the end of a story for Margaret, a blessing left in ink and gratitude. She put the letter on the mantel next to their wedding photo. Meanwhile, in a quiet apartment in Los Angeles, Keanu sat at his small desk, writing with a pen on a legal pad. No laptop. He had received a copy of the letter from a friend who had seen it shared in a hospice care forum. He read it once, folded it, and wrote a reply. The letter said, "Dear Audrey, thank you for being the kind of person who sits with people when they are ready to leave this world. Thank you for letting our moment pass through you and into someone else's peace. This wasn't my story. I was just passing through. But stories like yours remind me that sometimes the quietest parts of our lives are the ones that matter most. You may never know how much this letter mattered, but I will." K. Keanu sealed the letter, addressed it, and sent it to the hospice center in Minnesota. It only said, "Audrey West, night nurse." No press releases or interviews. But 2 weeks later, Audrey received it while sitting next to another patient. She opened it and read the words. She didn't feel surprised by who sent it, but she felt seen, and it only took a few words to make her feel that way. The story that started as a wrong turn into a vineyard had now become something more. It had turned into a thread quietly connecting strangers from different places, different lives. It reminded them that sometimes the most powerful moments aren't planned. They happen by accident. They don't belong to anyone. They are shared. Somewhere in Sonoma County, a young couple looked at the photo on their wall every day. Not because of the fame, but because of the belief that kindness had come in, uninvited, and stayed long enough to change the room. The letter from Audrey West stayed on Eliza's mantel like a quiet friend. When guests came over, they would ask about it, expecting it to be from a family member or maybe something romantic Nathaniel had written early in their relationship. Eliza would gently explain that it wasn't from anyone she knew, at least not personally. It was from a nurse, a stranger who had seen something special, a photo of joy that gave comfort to a woman at the end of her life. The guests would listen quietly, and the most powerful reactions were the ones filled with awe. As the days passed, Eliza thought about Margaret, the elderly woman in Minnesota, holding that photo of strangers at a wedding as her last view of life. It stirred something inside her. It wasn't guilt or pride. It was a sense of responsibility. The kind of feeling that whispered, "This happened for a reason. Don't waste it." One morning, while having coffee in her robe, Eliza told Nathaniel, "I want to do something." He stopped what he was doing, looked at her and asked, "What do you mean?" She replied, "For Margaret. For people like her. For Audrey. For the people we don't see who hold space for others quietly. I want to do something because of what happened. Not to honor it, but to continue it." Nathaniel sat down and asked, "What are you thinking?" And that's how the Lightkeepers dinner was born. It wasn't a fundraiser or a big media event. It was just a quiet evening, meant to bring together people who help others, like nurses, hospice workers, teachers, and caregivers. No celebrities, no speeches, just dinner under the stars at the same vineyard where the wedding had been. A place set for people whose names were not in the news, but who carried the weight of the world on their shoulders every day. Eliza worked with the vineyard to plan the dinner. They reached out to local hospice care centers with anonymous invitations. There was no need to RSVP. The card simply said, "You've already earned your seat." Nathaniel helped with all the details, renting tables, hiring musicians, and even helping the chef make the food. Everything was planned to feel special but not fancy. The food was simple: roast chicken, vegetables, warm bread, and honey cake with fresh cream. Each guest would get a small note with their dinner. It said, "You held someone through pain. You sat with them in silence. You showed up when the world looked away. Tonight we see you." Word spread quietly, and people started showing up. Some came with tears in their eyes, unsure how they had been chosen. Others came dressed in their Sunday best, unsure what to expect. What they found was a table filled with good food, music playing softly, candles glowing, and people welcoming them with smiles. On the night of the dinner, Eliza wore a simple blue dress and greeted each guest. Some hugged her, some just nodded. There were widows, ICU nurses, home care aides, grief counselors. One woman, an elderly guest named Charlotte, came with her son, who had Down syndrome. She said, "I've never been invited anywhere like this before." "Thank you." Nathaniel stood beside her, his heart swelling with pride. Then, just before the last guest arrived, a familiar sound echoed across the gravel driveway, the hum of a motorcycle. It was Keanu. He stepped off his bike, dressed in a soft charcoal suit with an open collar. No cameras. No publicist. He quietly walked to Eliza and said, "You made something beautiful." Eliza, stunned but calm, smiled and replied, "So did you, without even meaning to." Keanu didn't give a speech that night. He didn't pose for pictures or try to steal attention. He simply moved through the crowd like a guest. He served wine, helped a man with mobility issues, and listened to stories from nurses and caregivers. When someone asked him why he was there, he simply shrugged and said, "I was invited." At the end of the night, when most guests were leaving, Keanu pulled Eliza aside. He said, "You know, most people think legacy is something you leave behind. But this is a legacy that walks beside you." Eliza nodded, her voice catching, but she spoke through it. "I just didn't want Margaret's last smile to end with a photo. I wanted it to start something." Keanu looked at her, his eyes soft, and placed a hand over his heart. "She'd be proud." Gareth Nathaniel put her arm around his wife, and together they watched the moon rise over the vineyard. The vineyard was no longer just a place for weddings. It had become a special place full of stories that needed to be shared. Far away, in a quiet hospice room, there was a photo on a nightstand. It was old and faded, but it still had a warm glow to it. The music from that night, the lightkeeper's dinner, was still in the air. The vineyard had become peaceful again. The lanterns were put away, and the tables were folded up. But the memory of that dinner stayed, like a song you keep hearing in your mind even after it ends. Eliza and Nathaniel went back to their normal lives, but something had changed in them. It was also clear that it had changed something in the people who had been there, too. They started getting phone calls, emails, and handwritten letters. The letters all said the same thing: "I didn't know I needed that until I felt it." One letter came from Harold Bennett, a 70-year-old man who volunteered at a hospice. He had been a jazz pianist in New York long ago. Harold had been at the dinner, sitting quietly at the edge of the table, listening to the stories. He didn't want to stand out, but everyone remembered how he smiled and paid attention to what was being shared. He sent a letter to Eliza and Nathaniel with a simple craft envelope, with neat handwriting. The letter said, "Dear Eliza and Nathaniel, that night was a gift, and gifts deserve something in return. I've written a piece of music. At first, it was just me playing whatever came to mind, but now I've written it down. It's not much, just a song. But it comes from what I felt in that vineyard. The memories, the kindness of strangers, and that tall man who served wine like he had always done it. The song is called Accidental Grace. If you hear it, then it has done its job. Warmly, Harold Bennett." Along with the letter, there was a small flash drive. Eliza, still in her office clothes, plugged it into her laptop. A simple audio file played. There was no title, no name, just music. The piano played soft and slow, not rushing. It felt calm, like someone humming a lullaby without words. The music didn't make her sad, but it made her feel peaceful and warm, like the night of the dinner. By the time the music ended, she was in tears. Nathaniel walked in and saw her face. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat next to her, and they played the song again and again. By the fourth time, Eliza said, "We need to share this. Not online, not everywhere, but with him." Eliza knew someone who could help them send it to Harold. A woman named Vivian worked at the vineyard. She had helped a lot during the planning of the dinner. Eliza texted Vivian and asked, "Can you get this to him? It's important." 3 days later, Keanu Reeves stood alone in his kitchen at 11:47 p.m., holding a glass of water in one hand. He was listening to Harold's jazz piece. It didn't sound like it had been made in a studio. It felt like it had been created from the heart. Keanu stood still, eyes closed, just feeling the music, not trying to understand it, but trying to feel every note. When the last note faded, he sat down at his desk and wrote in his journal, "Even the smallest acts of presence can leave music behind." The next morning, Keanu asked his assistant to contact Harold Bennett. He didn't want any attention or press. It was just a personal message from Keanu. It said, "Dear Harold, thank you for reminding me that grace has sound, that kindness has keys. If you're open to it, I'd like to record this piece in a way that lets it live beyond headphones. Not for fame, not for money, but to give it to hospices and care homes everywhere. A quiet room deserves a quiet gift. You've already given us the music. Let me help share it. Keanu." Harold was surprised but very touched by the message. He hadn't been in a studio for many years, but 3 weeks later, he met with Keanu in a private studio in Los Angeles. There were no reporters, just Keanu, Harold, and a sound engineer. They recorded Accidental Grace in one take, with no edits, no special effects. It was just Harold playing the piano and Keanu sitting quietly, remembering the music of that night in the vineyard. After they finished recording, Keanu turned to Harold and said, "You just built a bridge out of notes." Harold smiled and replied, "And you helped people cross it." The song was sent privately to over 100 hospice care centers all over the country, with a small note that said, "For those who sit in silence and those who never get to leave a goodbye behind, may this melody hold space for what can't be said." There were no names or logos, just the music. And in many quiet rooms, from Minneapolis to Miami, from Phoenix to Portland, people listened to the piano play. It wasn't just music. It was a language more human than words, the sound of forever. The vineyard was quiet again. The vines had started to turn brown in the fall, and the sun was lower in the sky. A year had passed since the wedding, but calling it a wedding didn't feel right anymore. To Eliza and Nathaniel, it had become something more, a special moment that divided their lives into before and after. They hadn't planned to return to the vineyard, but on the one-year anniversary of their marriage, they felt the pull to come back. Not to relive the past, but just to be there again. They didn't bring a crowd. They just brought each other. Eliza wore the same earrings she wore on their wedding day, and Nathaniel wore his father's watch. They brought a picnic basket, a small bottle of wine, and a photo that had become special to their family, a picture of them with Keanu, smiling together. When they walked to the spot where they had first danced, they found something waiting for them, a bench. It wasn't there before. It was made of reclaimed wood, carved by hand, and placed beneath the tree where they had danced. On the back of the bench were words in soft writing. "Sometimes forever begins by accident." Below, there were two initials, K.R. Eliza sat down slowly, and tears came without rushing. They had been waiting for this moment. Nathaniel put his arm around her. They didn't need to speak. There was an envelope on the bench, held in place by a smooth stone. Inside, there was a card written in Keanu's familiar handwriting. It said, "Dear Sam and Nathaniel, this place held something rare, not because I was here, but because you welcomed me without hesitation. You didn't ask me to perform. You asked me to stay. That's rare. I wanted to leave something behind. Not a plaque, not a tribute, but a space for others who find something beautiful by mistake. I won't be here again, but my gratitude will be. This bench is for the lightkeepers, the Margarets, the Claires, the Harolds, and the strangers who make the story better just by being there. Thank you for reminding me what grace feels like when it's given quietly. With love, Keanu." Eliza held the letter like it was something sacred, and Nathaniel whispered that he remembered everything. They sat on the bench until the sun started to set, casting long, amber streaks across the hill. Just before they were about to leave, a soft sound floated through the air. It was the music again, Accidental Grace. Someone had placed a small speaker in the vineyard. The music played gently, like the scent of jasmine floating through the trees, connecting the past and the present. One by one, people began to appear, not as a crowd, but as individuals. Vivian, the vineyard staffer who helped plan the dinner, appeared and sat on the grass with a shawl around her shoulders. Audrey West, who had flown in from Minnesota, sat quietly nearby. Harold, the pianist, walked up with a cane and nodded at Eliza from a distance. No one had been invited, but they came anyway. And then, like poetry in motion, a man on a motorcycle appeared at the edge of the hill. No one cheered. No one gasped. They just watched as Keanu took off his helmet and walked toward the bench. He didn't speak. He just sat next to Eliza and Nathaniel, bowed his head slightly, and closed his eyes. The music kept playing. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the last note of Accidental Grace hung in the air, lingering like a memory, forever to be remembered. If you liked this story, tell me in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more fun adventures and mysteries. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.